Okay, welcome to Unit 4. This is the first note sheet of our new unit on equations and inequalities. And today we're going to start with page 1, which is addition and subtraction equation models. So our first example here says x plus -2 equals -5. So I want you to think about and look at the picture. What would be in the cup? If both sides have to equal each other, there's 5 negatives over here, 2 negatives plus some that we can't see. What would x equal? If you said x would equal -3, you are correct. Okay. Now, look down below and you notice there's a key. Open circles are positive. Red circles are negative. We're going to use the key to write an equation, and then we're going to come up with what x equals. So the first one, we have x plus -5 equals +3. So you got to decide, what can I add to -5 to equal +3? Well, if I'm adding negatives and positives, I know if I get a positive answer, there must be, if it equals a positive, then my x must be positive. So x must equal what? If you said x should equal 8, you are correct. Okay, number 2. We have x plus 4 equals -3. Now, our equation equals a negative this time. So x must equal negative, because if you have more negatives and you add it to positives, then the answer will be negative. So I must have x must equal what? -7. If you said -7, you are correct. Okay, moving down to the bottom. Now this time it says the cup represents the variable, and then we have to solve it. So the cup is going to represent, we'll call it x, and we have x plus 4 positives equals 6 positives. So what plus 4 would equal 6? If you said x should equal 2, you are correct. Okay, looking at the example to the right. There's actually 2 ways to write this. We have a cup and 4 negatives, so we can write x plus -4 equals -5. But when we were learning about integers, we learned that adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. So we could also write x minus 4 equals -5. Now, what number plus 4 negatives would equal 5 negatives? If you said it should equal -1, you are correct. Okay, moving on to the bottom. Okay, we have a variable plus 5 negatives equals 3 positives. So we could write x plus -5 equals +3. So x plus -5 equals +3. Now, we just practiced this on the last one. See if you can come up with the subtraction one for this one. If you said x minus 5 equals 3, you are correct. Now, we have x plus 5 negatives equals 3 positives. Well, if we're going to get a positive answer, we must have more positives. So we need 3 more positives than negatives, which would make the answer x equals 8. Okay, and the very last one on this page, we have x plus 2 equals -3. So we want to ask ourselves, what can I add to 2 positives to get 3 negatives? Well, I must have more negatives. So I have 3 more negatives than positives, so I must have what? If you said x equals negative 5, you are correct. Okay, now on page 2, I'm going to show you the algorithm behind solving addition and subtraction equations, as well as how to check your answer to make sure you're correct. Okay, so it says solving an equation involves getting the blank by itself. So our goal to solve any equation is always to get the what by itself. If you were thinking variable, you are correct. So write in the word variable. By performing the same operation, addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division on both sides of the equation. AKA, you have to blank the equation. AKA balancing the equation. So to solve an equation, we always think about doing the blank of what is given. Inverse, or another word for inverse is opposite. Now, when you're solving these equations, remember the golden rule of algebra. What we do to one side of the equation, we must do to the other. Okay, so let's check out and see how this algorithm works. Now, anytime we solve addition or subtraction equations, we're always going to set up a t. And we're always going to circle our variable. So we're going to circle our variable. And when we're solving addition and subtraction equations, we're going to set up our t. Okay, what is the opposite of adding 6? If you were thinking subtract 6, you are correct. So I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. 6 minus 6 equals 0, so that cancels. Bring down your variable. And 11 minus 6 equals 5. Now, to check your answer, and a lot of these you'll be able to check in your head, like this one, but some of them you might want to double check using your calculator. So we need to ask ourselves, what is 5 plus 6? 5 plus 6 is 11. So the left side equals 11, the right side equals 11. So therefore my answer of x equals 5 is correct. Okay, let's look at example number 2. Okay, circle the variable and set up your t because this is subtraction. What's the opposite of subtracting 8? If you said add 8, you are correct. Now, the reason why minus 8 and positive 8 cancel is because when we talked about integers, we said that subtracting 8 is the same as adding negative 8. So really, this minus 8 is worth 8 negatives. So if I add 8 negatives plus 8 positives, that equals 0 because of the additive inverse property. So they cancel, and x will equal 24 plus 8, which is 32. So x equals 32. Now I'm not done. I'm going to double check, and this one is fairly easy to check, so we can check this one in our head. So 32 minus 8 equals 24. And what is 32 minus 8? You're right, it is 24, and the left side equals 24, the right side equals 24, so it checks. Okay, let's look at example number 3. Now, the x is no longer in the beginning, that's okay. If it's kind of in the middle like this, we have to circle the operation that's in front of it, because that will tell us if the variable is negative or if it's positive. In this case, it's positive because it has a plus sign there. So now we want to get rid of 12. Well, you got to think about, would we add 12 or subtract 12? If you said subtract 12, you are correct, because 12 minus 12 equals 0, so that cancels. Bring down your variable. 3 minus 12 is negative 9. So x equals negative 9. Now let's check. So our equation says 12 plus my answer, which is negative 9, equals 3. Now, this is the part where if you're not real good with negatives and positives, you can double check this in your calculator by hitting 12 plus 9 negative. And if you do that or do it in your head, you should get 3. So the left side is 3, the right side we already know equals 3. So it does in fact check. Okay, moving on to example number 4. So first step, circle the variable in the operation. And because it's plus x, that tells us our variable is positive. So now we need to get rid of this number right here. So how do you cancel out 15 negatives? Would you add 15 or subtract 15? If you said add 15, you are correct because that's the additive inverse property. When you add its opposite, it always equals 0. So cancel those out, bring down your x, and negative 3 plus 15 is what? 12. So let's double check our answer. Negative 15 plus 12 equals negative 3. Once again, if you're good with adding negatives and positive integers, then you can just do it in your head. But if you need to double check it in your calculator, please do so by typing in 15 negative plus 12 positive. And your head and calculator should tell you the same thing, which is negative 3. So negative 3 equals negative 3. It checks, so our answer is 12. Now, with 5 and 6, they're a little bit different than the first 4. So look at the first 4 and notice what side of the equal sign the variables are on. You should have noticed they're on the left, but in 5 and 6, they're on the right. So I'm going to show you in number 5 where you can move it, and then in number 6, I'm going to show you how you can still do it without moving it. So in number 5, if you want to move it, you just scribble it out and move it to the end. Now, we're going to circle our variable, and we're going to draw our t. Now, before, every time we've seen an addition sign, we've subtracted, like in number 1. But we see an addition sign here, but we're not actually going to subtract here because we have negative 2. So we said already adding negative 2 is like subtracting positive 2. So if we had minus 2, we would add 2 to both sides. So this is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to add positive 2 to both sides. Okay, negative 2 plus 2 equals 0, so those cancel. So x equals negative 15 plus 2, which is negative 13. Now, once again, we have to check, so we're going to check the original. So the original says 15 equals my answer plus negative 2. Now, once again, oops, I should have wrote negative 15 equals negative 13 plus negative 2. Now, once again, we're going to figure out what 13 negatives plus 2 negatives are. And once again, calculator by doing 13 negative plus 2 negative, or in your head. And no matter which way you do it, you should see that both sides do in fact equal negative 15. Now, the last one, I told you I would show you how to do it without moving the equal sign, even though the variable's on the right. So we're going to circle our variable, and we're going to draw our t. Now, this is a special case. So whenever you see a minus and a negative next to each other, we talked about this when we did integers. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So when you see this, the easiest way to tackle these problems are to just change the minus and the negative to positive. So the way I like to do it is just change it, the minus and the negative, to a big plus sign, like this. Okay, so now we have 11 equals x plus 23. Now what's the opposite of adding 23? Subtracting 23. Okay, and the 23's cancel, so bring down your x, and 11 minus 23 is negative 12. Okay, so I wrote it backwards, but it still means the same thing. Negative 12 equals x is the same as x equals negative 12. Now to double check this, I'm going to do 11 equals negative 12, which was my answer, minus negative 23. Now, once again, when you check this, you can just do this. So now we're trying to figure out what 12 negatives plus 23 positives are. And if you remember your integer rule, when you're adding a negative and a positive, you can subtract and keep the sign of the most. So I have more positives than negatives. So the answer is positive 11. So 11 equals 11. That does, in fact, check. Now that concludes your notes. Hopefully you've enjoyed the notes and now understand how to add and subtract equations. So now try your homework and have a great day.